Welcome to Decades of Horror, the 1980s.
I've done life. Now I'm doing death.
Talk about flair.
Yeah. This is episode 159, recorded June 24th, 2020. I am your host, Jeff Mohr, and this podcast is about horror films released between 1980 and 1989. Each episode, my co-hosts Bill Mulligan, Crystal Cleveland, and Chad Hunt and I will tackle another classic or not so classic film from this radical, gory, influential, and gruesome decade. Joining me tonight is Crystal Cleveland, the living dead girl, and co-host of the Gruesome Magazine podcast. How are you doing, Crystal?
I'm really excited about tonight. Talking about some cool effects is always super duper fun.
Yes. And living and dead. And
for sure.
Also joining us is Chad Hunt, comic book artist and co-host of Decades of Horror, the classic era, and the 1970s. Chad, buddy, how are you?
Well, I just crawled up out of a dead pit, and boy, is my brain rotten.
And you're seeing green, right?
Yeah.
All right. We also have, last but not least, Bill Mulligan, writer, director, and special effects guru, and co-host of Decades of Horror, the 1970s, and all-around nice guy.
How
are you, Bill?
If you press me hard, my eyes light up.
It's just gas.
All right. So, as you may get, we do have a special guest with us today. But
Yay.
First, I want to announce the episode we're doing. We're covering The Dead Pit from 1989, directed by Leonard, starring Jeremy Slate, Cheryl Lawson, Stephen Gregory Foster, and director of special effects is Ed Martinez. And gee, we just happen to have Ed Martinez is with us. He was nice enough to join us. How are you doing, Ed?
I'm in the house. Ed Martinez in the house.
That's awesome. We are so thankful you're taking the time to do this.
Yes.
Oh, my pleasure.
And boy, this is chock full of effects.
Mm-hmm.
The Dead Pit.
That's my thing.
Yes. So hopefully we're going to learn something here.
Which I'm sure they gave you a huge budget and all the time in the world that you needed, because that's how things rolled in the 1980s.
Yeah, Tree Fitty. And a couple of days.
we told him not to give it Tree Fitty.
He'd just use it all up. Yeah, the synopsis of this film, if you haven't seen it, is a renegade doctor is shot dead and entombed with his fiendish experiments in the basement of an abandoned wing of a mental hospital. 20 years later, a mysterious woman is admitted with amnesia. No, it's not amnesia. They took part of my brain away. And her arrival is marked by an earthquake, which cracks the seal to the dead pit, freeing the evil doctor to continue his work. So excited.
That's about it.
So yeah. Oh, that's a great synopsis. And we talked about this too. Spoiler alert. We don't, we kind of expect you to have already seen these. This movie came out 31 years ago. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. And I'm not sure, but I think maybe you could still get a Blu-ray from Red Zone.
I think, actually, Code Red Video.
Code Red, I'm sorry.
Is the company who put it out on DVD. And I think they may have it now available, streaming. You might have to go check them out and look it up. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thanks for the correction. Code Red, not Red Zone. I don't know what. I just made up a company, I guess. Before we get started, we have some general details about the film. The production company is Cornerstone Production Company. It was released a lot of different times. France, the release date was May 1989 at the Cannes Film Festival. The video premiere, according to IMDb, was January 29th, 1990 in the U.S., and it was also released in October 1990 in West Germany. I found one other title. Most of them were just pretty much the Dead Pit, but in Mexico it was called El Pozo, which translated as the hole. But if you just type in Pozo, it says well. So I don't know, how these things change meanings. But if you put El Pozo, it said the hole. So.
It's weird how titles are, various films are known by various titles all around the world. Like another one I worked on called The Dead and the Damned in England is known as Cowboys and Zombies.
Wow.
Well, of course, because
there are cowboys and zombies in it.
I usually like to read the German titles just because they sound so guttural, even if they're
Zeichen.
That's right. Exactly.
That's a love story. Yeah.
Yes.
The Farfignugan Pit.
I kind of like that one.
Yeah, what's weird is I over the years, many years, there have been another group of people out there calling themselves the Dead Pit. The Dead Pit, the creepy Kentuckian.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you heard of those guys?
Yeah, I used to listen to them.
I always wanted to talk to them and find out, I don't think they ever reviewed the Dead Pit.
They call the podcast the Dead Pit?
The Dead Pit. Yeah, and they're back on the air now, I think.
Yeah, but I want to get in touch with them and say, hey, have you ever watched it?
So I don't know, man, and hopefully Ed can help out with this, but according to IMDb, the filming locations were the Granite Rideout Engineering Special Effects Studio in Santa Cruz. Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, there was a warehouse that the gentleman who was the art director, his name was Ransom Rideout, he and another gentleman by the name of Dan Granette, they had a business there called Ransom and Granette, and they ended up, hiring Ransom for the art director, and he built the set of the Dead Pit in that building.
Ah, okay.
Very cool.
Part of it was filmed at Agnew's Developmental Center in Santa Clara County, which was the kind of the external stuff, right? At the insane asylum.
Yeah, but also a lot of interior stuff too, because that location was a very iconic, beautiful spot in the California area. Here in our area, there's this big property there that is a real, mental institution. And the story goes, like I went there, to work on set and everything. And when I went there, initially as a location scout, with the director and the producers, I saw and learned, about the buildings, about the location. And one of the things that apparently happened there, and this is sort of partial inspiration for the story of Dead Pit, was in back in the earthquake, the 1906 earthquake that happened in San Francisco. This facility was there, and they, had the building fall down. Like there was old, mental patients and stuff living there in rooms, in beds and stuff. And when the building all fell down, a lot of people died, and they ended up having to have a big open grave, big mass grave dug, because they couldn't, keep the bodies in cold storage and stuff like that, but much like when a big disaster happens, like in San Francisco, there was hundreds of bodies, that needed to be buried and stuff. And so this location had, I'm not mistaken, maybe at least 50 people dead that had to be buried in a big mass grave on the premises of where we shot the Dead Pit. And the director and the producer, visited this location and were told these stories. And there were photographs too on the walls of some of the old office buildings and stuff of the location. And so we heard about this, and it was really creepy and really spooky. The building, the facility, had not been used. There was like these wings that were like multi-floored dormitory wings where, like, when you go and watch the movie and you see, the characters walking down hallways where there's room by room by room with those little windows in the doors, like in a mental institution, that's real. That's all on location at Agnew State Mental Hospital. And some of it, had been closed and not, open to the public. And it was all, rat infested and paint peeling and cobwebs. I mean, it was like, thousands and thousands of dollars of set set dressing, and and it was just there. I mean, we were led into these buildings and shown how rotted and ugly and old and everything it was, but it was beautiful. It was perfect for our film.
Right.
It was like an art directing crew went in and somebody said, like, what would you want it to look like if you were going to make a really gruesome horror film? And it looked like that when we walked through.
lots of long hallways to run down too, and get lost.
Yeah, beautiful locations.
Do is it still around? Is it still?
Actually, ironically, 6-7 years ago when I became blind, prior to that, my wife and I went to the location, which isn't very far from here where I live. It's about maybe an hour's drive, and we went to the location, and a couple of the buildings are still there, but a big portion of the area was purchased by Sun Microsystems, and they built what they call their Sun Microsystems campus there. So it's all brand new, computers and climate controlled buildings and stuff like that. But the grounds are still nice. It's beautiful. There was a big long road with palm trees lining this big road that was led to the entranceway, and the main building had a clock tower, and that clock tower was iconic, for our film. And we had built a miniature of that building, of that clock tower building. And at the end of the film, spoiler alert, we blow up there's a big water tower next to the clock tower, and we blow up the water tower in miniature and have it crack open and fall onto the location of where the base of the clock tower is, because that's where the dead pit is located. There's a basement chamber under the clock tower where the mad scientist doctor is doing all his crazy research.
Y'all did a good job on the miniature too, because when I saw that, I'm like, okay, this is a miniature. I figured that, and I had to go back and look. Was it always a miniature? I was impressed.
Well, ironically, of course, it's a real place. It's a real building and everything. So throughout the film, we're showing it. We're using it as a location and everything. And a couple of times, we do a long shot, like that road that I was telling you about that has all the palm trees and stuff. And so we kind of set it up where when we do pull the miniature and it's at night, I used to be an architectural model builder for years, prior to working on this film. And so I knew, how to do models and miniature trees and all this kind of stuff. And one of the only problems we had, also, I did the pyro on the miniature water tower. We built a miniature water tower, and we put, an explosive, literal, full-blown explosive on set on this miniature water tower, and blew it up in slow motion, in high-speed photography, so it would look, proper for the scale and everything. But one of the biggest problems you have with pyro and with miniature water is that's what gives away the scale. So even though the model is fairly good size, once the water is introduced on the shot, it gives it away. And so you got to cut real quick, and it's a low budget film, it's the charm of physical effects, like nowadays, somebody might be tempted to go in there with CGI and fix things and try and make it George Lucas it, and fix it, make it better and stuff. But I like things like that, the charm of stop motion animation, the charm of miniatures, the charm of, the old way of doing things. I'm a physical effects guy,
Right.
Well, I thought the water tower collapsing looked great.
Yeah, I thought it looked really good. I mean, you say the water gives it away, and it does a little, but the fact that it's I've seen far worse in way bigger productions. And,
that makes me feel good. That warms my heart.
Well, and it was, for me anyway, Bill, it was more of a, when the water came into it, I was like, holy shit, that's a miniature. Because I didn't realize it before that. So, but yeah, no, we love that stuff.
Good. Yeah, I mean, me and my crew of people, I had a handful of people working with me, and, we built miniature trees, and, you could take wire and twist it to make the branches and then coat it with latex. And then you could put steel wool for leaves and then spray it with different colors of paint and everything. And it's like, we did all that, to make that stuff look as good as we could.
I am writing down notes right now, just to let you know.
Great.
Yeah, I think I sort of filled Ed in on people's backgrounds, very short descriptions, but I said that Bill had done some special effects on some indie
And we have something in common because all of my movies could also be said to have been produced for well under $1 million, which quote from. I'm going to use that every time now.
Very, very, very well under.
So we always try, Ed, to find. Well, first, let me say the filming dates. I couldn't find exact filming dates, although it said, I think it was like completed May 30th, 1988. Is that?
Well, we shot it. Right? We shot it during this one long period of time, and then they stopped production because we kind of ran out of money. The initial budget was like $100,000, and we started going over budget, and then they had to stop production and raise some more money, and get local investments and stuff like that. And then we went, back to shooting a little bit more, and things were really getting scary there at the end where, we were completely out of money, but we still had stuff to do. And, we ended up like running out of money and stopping production when nobody was really happy with what was going on, what had been done. So they took what they had, and they cut together like 18 minutes of a reel that they had a film, a film representative go to the Milan Film Festival and represent the film to try to get distribution deal. And they made a great distribution deal and made, more money with just the foreign sales than the whole budget. Like the budget was less than 100,000 at that time when we were starting to run out of money. And when they came back, they had a check for like $350,000, to complete filming and do audio post-production and music. And, I got a little bit more of a bump in budget money to do a reshoot and complete the very last bit of the film with a kind of a more elaborate special effects sequence. Kind of like what happened with Hellraiser. The first Hellraiser film had a similar situation where they were shooting and the footage was looking good, and they decided to bump up a little budget for the back of the sequence of when Frank is rematerializing and coming back to life and stuff like that. Like that was a reshoot. And so similarly to our film, like the very end of the film with this meltdown and this thing that, I ended up calling the suck down head, which was like a Head and Shoulders fake head that I made, for the demise of our villain character at the end of the film,
Yeah, and they talk about that in the that Fangoria article that you said. Anybody that's got a set of Fangoria or access to them, there's a pretty decent article.
It's a good article, yeah.
Interviewing Ed about the Dead Pit. I was just trying to look and see.
I read that article firsthand when it was first published.
I remember reading that too. That's the sort of stuff I would eat up with a spoon because you have a special effects person who is actually telling you how they're doing it, and it's just like, whoa, that was so great.
That's in issue 92 from May 1990.
Yes,
year 8. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that particular issue has the cover is the Tales from the Dark Side monster creature that Ray Dong Chong turns into.
Yes.
And
then there's like a little square picture on it as an insert that has a photograph of the Dead Pit meltdown guy, the Dr. Ramzi's, and it says something like, inside the Dead Pit or something.
So that's way better information than I could find no budget information except in Fangoria. It said produced for well under $1 million. So that's why Phil was bringing that up.
I mean, at the time that article came out, the film had not yet even been released on VHS, video here in America. So, we were being cagey about revealing, to the public, like how much the budget really was, because back in those days, when you were trying to negotiate, with a VHS company or whatever, to sell it, you didn't want them to know how low your budget was. In fact, what they used to do is try to book a film that was perhaps not that good and was not going to be worthy of playing in movie theaters. They would try to get some local, distribution, like of a couple of movie theaters, so that they could literally say to the, distributor that they're selling it to, like, oh, it played in theaters,
Yeah. Before we go any farther, we usually have a little fun with the taglines, and the ones that were listed for this one, the first one was "Drop in anytime." I
don't know how, because there was so much stuff coming out of it. There was no room to fall
Yeah.
into it.
And then supposedly on the VHS it said they're out.
Right. Out of the
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a hole in the fence.
yeah.
The third one gets it though.
The third one actually fits pretty well. When the dead start to walk, you'd better start running.
Good advice.
Yeah, it kind of goes without saying there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is one of those films that you can have some pretty good fun with all the different taglines.
Well, we constantly threaten to start writing taglines for movies because some of them are pretty lame, but they have fun with them. We have fun with them. So let's get into our impressions of this, and I'm going to start with I'm pretty sure Chad and Bill had seen this before, so I think I'll start with Mr. Chad Hunt. What's the first time you saw this, and what are your impressions, and how did it hold up this time around?
I read about it. I read the article in Fangoria, so I was constantly looking for it in the VHS rental, an old mom and pop place I used to go to.
Do you remember the box art? And
yeah, that's
yeah.
what I was just walking by, and this out of the corner of my eye, I see this. I think it was embossed as well.
Mm-hmm.
The zombie on the front, and you just I picked the box up and the eyes glowed, and there was absolutely no way I was putting that back on the shelf. I had to see it. I finally found it, took it home and watched it, and just this movie does not get enough credit for what it was. It was, to me, at the time I watched it, it was sort of a cross between Nightmare on Elm Street and Night of the Living Dead. And that's all I needed to hear to love it. I love the character. The evil doctor, Ramzi, I love that character. I love the half-naked women running around in underwear the whole time.
Yeah.
I was 15 or something. So, so I loved all that stuff. And the gore and the makeup effects were just so, so awesome for the time. And this wasn't one of those zombie movies where you've got one or two hero zombies in the foreground and the rest of them were wearing like masks. It looked like each zombie was like meticulously made up and everything. So I was just in love with this movie for then. And I've watched it several times since then. And it's been a few years since I've seen it last. So when we watched it for the podcast this time, it holds up. And like everything, we have to watch things through a certain lens when we watch these older movies. And it's still to me, it holds up as one of the better zombie movies of the decade. And that's including the Romero stuff. As far as effects work and stuff like that, and I'm not trying to kiss up Ed, I promise. but it's just one of my favorites as far as the special effects go and zombie effects and stuff like that go. It was very imaginative and very well done, and I always appreciated stuff like that. So, yeah, to me, it holds up to this day.
Thank you. That's very high praise. One of the things about the box, that I was talking about is actually the year that the box came out, the VHS came out, Entertainment Magazine awarded it, along with Frankenhooker, the best video box cover of the year. And because Frankenhooker had...
And all it took was two glowing eyes.
Yeah, well, it had a three-dimensional vacuum-formed...
Yes.
And that was unique. There was only a couple others that ever did that. And the thing about the Frankenhooker that was tying it was that Frankenhooker had an audio chip, and you push the button on the cover, and it would say, "Want a date? Want a date?"
Yeah.
And so Dead Pit had the box with the eyes that were green LEDs that were on the box with the zombie's eyes. So you push the button on the box, and the eyes light up. And funnily, in the film, the zombie, Dr. Ramzi's the evil villain, his eyes glow red in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Crystal, how about you? When was the first time you saw this? And what are your impressions now?
So this is the first time I saw it. So I only have one impression of it, but oh my God. Well, it got me from the very beginning with the doctor. Oh my gosh. He's a caricature and I just loved him so much. All I thought was soap actor, and I get behind that 1000%. He's like, do you think you could stop me, Gerald? But we also, like, one of the first effects we really see is the electrodes in the brain, which when I saw that, I was like, dang, it really is good. Especially, you know, I mean, because we've seen some really bad stuff. I was like, God, that looks really impressive. Yeah. And then there's a ton of effects. I mean, it's such an 80s movie. It's very cliche in a lot of ways, like the girl running around in her underwear the entire time, whining and crying. Ooh, like literally always in
Again,
angst.
I had no problem with that.
Her always being in angst just made me laugh for some reason. And of course, you know, I guess there's a twist, but I think we all knew what the twist was. I mean, right? It was pretty obvious. Yep. They pretty much kind of knew it. Yeah. Yeah. The wet t-shirt was one of my favorite scenes. I was a little bit too. I was dying. I was dying when I saw that. I was like, are you kidding me? And then it just rips off and I'm like, okay.
And why don't more places use fire hoses for their wet t-shirt guns?
The real hydrotherapy room.
But, you know, I thought that the story was actually pretty good. And I liked the way that they wrapped it all up. It made sense. It's convenient that they had a water tower there. I mean, but, you know, then there's a little bit of sacrifice, you know, self-sacrifice for the greater good. Yeah, it's a great movie. I loved it. I'm sad that I had not seen it before now.
Well, you were probably a baby when we were making it.
Yeah, you're a fetus.
But I really liked it. I liked it more than I care to admit. And I'm really like shocked that I hadn't heard of it more. I have to agree with Chad. I think it's completely underrated. I mean, I know a lot of people know about it, but even for me who does try to watch as much 80s as I can, I'm like, how have I not heard of this? It's really well made, I think. And it's clever.
Well, especially when you see, I think it's really impressive that the original budget was around $100,000. So right.
That's nothing.
You're right.
When you think of when you think about some of it, I mean, okay, it's a lot to like me.
Well, it was made with 35 millimeter, and we actually had a steady cam. I mean, it was we spent every penny of that money.
Well, that's part of it. You know, people hear this and they're like, $100,000, I could make 10 movies for $100,000. Like, yeah, you're not shooting on 35 millimeter. You're shooting on your camcorder. You're shooting on your DSLR. And if you make a mistake, you just go back and erase it over the chip. It doesn't cost you a dime. This is 35 millimeter. It's expensive to buy. It's expensive to shoot. It's expensive to edit.
All the lighting equipment, lenses, the track.
Yeah.
Dolly track, you know.
Speaking of the lighting, there was like one scene toward the end where they had the green lights and stuff. It looked really, it reminded me it had a little creep show kind of vibe to me. Like they look like little, I loved that. Sorry. I just wanted to bring that up. I just remember it caught my eye. I was like, that's great. Yeah.
Our DP, unfortunately, our DP, Marty Collins, has passed away within the past few years, but he was a brilliant cinematographer and he painted with light. I learned so much from him. I learned so much working with him.
Yeah, the lights were key, I think.
Yeah.
Bill, what about you?
I mean, I had read the article in Fangoria, of course, but I don't know if I remembered much of it. But when I saw the VHS, so I'm a sucker for gimmicks. The Marvel Comics made a fortune on me back in the 90s when they started like, hey, we can sell this idiot 10 copies of the same comic by having a hologram cover.
You're the guy.
I'm the guy, you know. Just, oh, man, I got to get all 10 different covers. If you put them together, it makes a scene. And my wife's like, you're an idiot.
No, marketing.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant. So now I have 10 copies of the same lame book. But this was just so much fun. I remember the Frankenhooker one, too. I'd forgotten all about that until you brought it up. pressing this. So I was heartbroken later when I saw the Dead Pit again, and it was a new version that didn't have the glowing eyes. I guess they reissued it at some point. It's like, oh.
Right. Those boxes, the originals with the glowing eyes, those are rare collectibles now.
Oh, don't tell me this. Yes, I totally believe you.
There are VHS collectors out there, like I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and there are people who make YouTube videos that just show off their VHS collections.
Yep. God bless them. I thought then, watching it, I thought then what I thought now. This is just about the most 80s movie we are ever going to see. Unless we review Night of the Comet, this is about as 80s as it gets, from the hair to the MTV-style cinematography and everything, which kind of dates it for me a little bit. I mean, the cinematographer did a great job and everything. He did what they were trying to do. But I kind of wish, with so much special effects, with so much cool makeup and everything, there's kind of a softness to it. Now, this may also be the print that I'm watching. I really would love to have seen those zombies in the kind of harsh, Evil Dead, Sam Raimi-esque thing in all their glory, because with all the mist and colored lights and everything else, it does give it a creepy feel. But whenever I'm always about special effects, I just want to see every shot, and the things that we did see up close looked good. The makeup looked good.
You got to see the DVD. The DVD is sharp and crisp.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's a 2-disc set that came out, and it has a behind the scenes segment. It's got a commentary by the director and the producer. It's got interviews with the actors. It's great.
See, that's one of the disappointing things. You find out sometimes it's a revelation when you see a good print of the film, or somebody, the Criterion collector, someone comes up with a really sharp thing, and you're like, I have completely misunderstood this film all my life. The first time I saw the restored Night of the Living Dead, I couldn't believe it. Everything that I thought Romero had tried to do with that film, I thought he was going for kind of a cheap cinematic look and everything. It's like, no, it's just lousy prints all these years.
Yeah.
But I love some of the effects, the especially toward the end, the face melt and all that. It's so fun, and it's great to see a film with so many. When you look at go on IMDb and see how many people played the dead.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We had over 150 zombies on one night.
Wow.
Oh, my goodness.
There have been a lot of movies that have called themselves some variation of Army of the Dead, but this one literally had an army of dead people.
Yeah, and most of them were out there freezing their butts off in the cold with no underwear, just like
no underwear?
Yeah,
wait, did you just say no underwear?
Yeah.
Hey,
well, they're in their hospital gowns, right?
Those hospital gowns that are all open in the back? That's what they were wearing.
Oh.
What? And they had no underwear on, for real, though?
Right. Because
Crystal seems to be focusing on that point.
Yeah, what is this underwear fetish?
Wait. No underwear? Did you say no underwear?
Wait.
Because I'm just trying to say, if someone comes up to me, they're like, okay, girl, we want you to be an extra on this movie.
But take your bras off and panties.
And I'd be like, yeah,
No
you're gonna sit in this freaking cold. I'm like,
like,
nah.
What kind of movie is this? Is this a Bill Mulligan movie?
Yeah.
You're an actress. You're a trooper, right? You could have done that.
Oh, she's a trooper.
I totally could have done it. It's just, I just think it's funny that you had masses of people.
That's not
In no underwear.
I gotta say, I did not think that the lead actress, Cheryl Lawson, I'm sure she's a lovely person, I didn't think she was the best actress I'd ever run across. But reading this one bit here, I now appreciate her more. If I could read this. On the Code Red DVD release of the film, lead actress Cheryl Lawson reveals why her character spends a portion of the movie in just a tiny tank top and bikini panties. Apparently, she felt that the normal size hospital gown made her look large, so she cut part of it off. The more her outfit was washed, the more it shrank, and the underwear became tighter, much to the delight and amusement of the film crew. And she is now my favorite actress, and I would like to use her on a project. That's the kind of out of the box thinking that I wish more actresses would, use.
Ironically, I've never heard that before. the thing that we did, on the set during the filming was, the costume lady, brought us, like me and 3 or 4 other people, the director, the producer, the cinematographer, we're all sitting there, having breakfast, like we used to shoot all night long. And so when the sun was coming up, we'd have to stop filming, because we're filming this all at night.
Right.
And so, we would have on set, in one of the places at this Agnew State Mental Hospital, we had taken over one of the wings, and our cooks and stuff had turned it into our lunchroom. And so early in the morning, they're making eggs, breakfast, for everybody. We're sitting there, and our costume lady comes in, and she's got on a hanger, on 3 different hangers, 3 different pairs of underwear, for us to look at, to pick and choose which is the pair that we're going to use for the scenes filming, Cheryl Lawson in the next couple of days. And so we all got to give our opinions about which ones. And of course, those are the ones we chose. But then the T-shirt thing, I had never heard that before. But, that it's true that there is, the wet T-shirt thing. In the script, it's a nightmare, and she's having this dream sequence where, the evil nurse Kygar, who is like Nurse Ratchet, she's her nemesis, while this poor girl is in this, mental institution. And so she's having this dream, this nightmare, where they put her in the water therapy room, and they start blasting her with the like a fire hose, and she's, tied up, like her arms are up above her head. And so the water blasts her, and then it rips a chunk of her flesh out of her cheek, and it knocks her shirt off, and it was interesting because we actually had to use dissolving thread on the top, on the stitching. And I was sitting there with might have even been able to see it on film. I know in the DVD version, everything's a little clearer, and you can see a little thread that I'm tugging from off camera, like I'm hiding down below the frame, and the water's blasting, and I'm getting all wet, and she's, turning her face away. And, in a close up, I do a thing where I pull with a monofilament, the chunk of flesh off of her cheek, and it bleeds on camera and reveals this big hole. And then the other sequence where it's more of a long shot, the water blasts her in the shirt and blasts it off and reveals her breasts,
As it will.
Yeah. Well, they had it was a pretty quick cut on the cut on the cheek. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I saw it. I wanted to see a close up.
And then she wakes up from her dream,
Yes. I got to ask Bill this, because Bill's kind of our Italian guy, but I thought a lot of the imagery with the colored lights and down the spiral stairs and that kind of stuff kind of reminded me of some of the Giallo stuff.
Yes, you know me. You know me. I mean, anytime if someone gave me a chance to do a movie, it's like, can we put some mannequins and colored lights in here? Because
our DP and our director were big fans of Dario Argento.
Yes, Mario Bava and Dario Argento. That's my stuff, and toss in some Lucio Fulci too. I just want to, believe it or not, yesterday delivered to my house were a dozen store mannequins. That.
Cool. Wait, why?
Well, because it was
I've got about 6 of them myself.
Yeah. Crystal, you sound exactly like my wife. And a friend of mine who knows me was working with someone who was mentioning a Belk had closed down, and they had all these mannequins I guess were going to be trashed. And he asked her, do you want a mannequin to do whatever people do with mannequins? Said, awesome. I have a friend who probably would, so I am finding if anyone breaks into my basement, they deserve the heart attack they're going to get.
I was going to say, Bill probably has the creepiest basement in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Haven't you ever seen Maniac, Crystal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love mannequins and dolls and stuff, so I'm totally into that. I think it's hot.
But yeah, I did appreciate the colored lights and everything. It's not realistic, but it's a movie about zombies. Yeah, I've always.
But it looked really, really cool.
Yes,
yeah.
Like Crystal mentioned, the green lighting and everything. I don't know why it's green, but it is. Shut up.
Yeah.
Go with it.
Don't ask too many questions.
That's right.
I started paying attention. There was some green, sometimes red, sometimes blue, but green was sort of the Dr. Ramzi. Was that his name? Dr. Ramzi.
Well, also,
color, it seemed like.
Dr. Ramzi's name is also, for horror fans, the old Herschel Gordon Lewis, the Blood Feast.
Oh, yes, Blood Feast.
Yes. The Ramzi's, the guy who is the Egyptian maker, the caterer.
Claude Ramzi.
Claude Ramzi's, yeah.
So we named our Dr. Ramzi's after him. And then also in the beginning of the film, that guy that's on the table that's being operated upon, he's got runes and stuff carved into his chest, bloody runes shown.
Yes.
So the backstory of Dr. Ramzi's is that he was an archaeological student, and studying medicine and studying magic and esoteric, like Lovecraftian stuff, and that's why the zombies are supernatural and stuff, is because he's mixing like magic, like sorcery and science, the sort of Lovecraftian concepts.
And that's why the poker through the eye, like they used to
lobotomizing lobotomize people. And that's for real. I went and did research at the San Francisco Medical College and got books down from the library there, and they actually had Viewmaster reels in the back of these medical books that you could put into a Viewmaster, so you could see 3D operations on people's brains and on their heads. And so I got all this information, and I learned about how the first lobotomy tools were made using ice picks.
Yes.
And so that lobotomy tool that we have is accurate. That was right out of the medical books.
Why didn't the Egyptians, as part of the mummification, didn't they pull the brains out through the nose?
Oh yeah,
that's right. That's right.
So that all fits in when you bring up his Egyptian.
And of course, if we ever got around to making a sequel, we could pull some of this stuff into it.
I was going to ask about that. This is so obviously set up for a sequel.
Yes,
it did make money. I'm wondering what happened. Why didn't one materialize?
Oh, that's a long story. I'll go into it later if we can have time. I'll let you guys.
Yeah, it was obviously set up for a sequel. Yeah, and I loved it because I wasn't really expecting it, but then when it pauses on that shot for a couple seconds, then I knew what was going to happen. But up until then, I wasn't thinking that they were going to go.
She picks up the ring.
Yeah. She has that downward sort of dark look on her face, and then looks up. Let's talk a little bit about the cast here. Well, first, Brett Leonard, and Brett Leonard had is a director and according to IMDb, a co-writer,
co-producer, director.
But he also did Virtuosity and Hideaway and Lawnmower Man.
Yes. Yes,
and a bunch of groundbreaking music videos.
He was kind of on the vanguard of CGI.
Have you heard of Feed?
No.
Feed is another one that he did in the last, 2004 or something like that, last 20 years or so. And he also did one of the Highlander sequels, one of the last Highlander sequels. But the Feed movie was one of these crazy movies about a guy who would get really obese women and kidnap them and put them in a room somewhere with a video camera on them and feed them to death. And he would put it on the internet, and people could bet on when she was going to die.
Oh, my God.
He was ahead of his time.
Yeah, so he made this creepy movie about that subject in Australia. He went to live in Australia for a while. He worked on one of the Swamp Thing movies or something like that. Yeah, it was like a comic book movie,
Yeah, it was Man Thing, which was like
Man Thing, right.
Swamp
and I believe he shot that in Australia. But Dead Pit was his very first feature film. He went from making 8mm films and shorts to the first feature Dead Pit on 35.
So help me out, you guys, because this is your first credit, at least on IMDb, correct?
Yes.
So how do you go from whatever you were doing to the two of you making this your first feature and coming and having this product come out, I guess? I
mean, for me, I was young, I was only, fresh out of college. I was just working on music videos and, working for doing commercials, television commercials. I was working as an architectural model builder. I hadn't yet gotten any breaks, to work on 35mm feature films. I'd applied a few places. Ironically, the same like week that I went in for the interview with Brett Leonard and his producer Gimel Everett, I also interviewed for another feature film that was being shot in the area, and that one was called The Vineyard. Have you guys ever heard of The Vineyard with James Hong? James Hong stars in this movie called The Vineyard, and it's a horror film, and a guy who later went on to become quite a big, good special effects artist who sculpted the dragon for Dragonheart. He was the guy who was going to do the effects on The Vineyard. And I would have ended up, like I interviewed, and if they had hired me, I would have ended up being his assistant. And so then I interviewed on The Dead Pit, and instead of working as an assistant on The Vineyard, I ended up being the effects director on The Dead Pit. I took that job instead.
That's a much better credit.
Right. And so instead of being, on a low budget film where I was, a peon, I got to be the king of the castle.
Wasn't that kind of scary?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. In fact, they handed me the script. Actually, the script wasn't quite finished, but they handed me like a treatment, that was, a lot of it was there, and I read it, and there was like about 15 or 20 meltdowns in it.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, I've never done a meltdown before in my life. And they're saying like, so what do you think? Can you do all this? And I'm like, yeah, sure.
Always say yes.
Because we all have heard those stories that, everybody, Dick Smith, Tom Smith, everybody says that when you get that job, if the opportunity presents itself, just jump in with both feet, because if you don't, you'll kick yourself. You'll never, you'll always regret that you had an opportunity that you passed up and stuff. And, if you don't know what you're doing, you can try to figure it out as you go along. And, a lot of people, like I was very lucky. I actually consulted with Dick Smith, and I actually consulted with other, top effects people in the business at the time, to ask their advice and find out, like how they did a meltdown, or how they did gelatin or, whatever. So I got a lot of great advice.
Now, can I just add, it's a little surprising, why are special effects people, by and large, I've found certainly, they're so generous with their knowledge. Yeah, I mean, they're all competing for the same jobs and everything. There's only so much to go around.
Not necessarily. I mean, I've found that, like, for instance, back in the day, Dick Smith tells this story that, and, for those of your listeners who may not know, Dick Smith is the multi-Academy Award winner who invented many of the techniques that we all consider to be standard by today's standards. And, he did The Exorcist, he did Amadeus, he did Little Big Man, just on and on and on, did many, many, many great things. He has been such a boon to this industry. When he was learning and teaching techniques, he produced like a book on how to do special effects makeup techniques, like mostly kind of monstery things, like Halloweenish type of stuff. But, that's one of the things that I got when I was young. Famous Monsters of Filmland published like a magazine at the time that was, the how to, do special makeup effects, for Halloween monsters and stuff, made by Dick Smith. And I bought a copy. In fact, to this day, I have several copies of that magazine that, it's a vintage, rare, collectible, pulp publication, just like an issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland. But, it got republished as a book. And, so anyway, Dick Smith made the adage of he will teach, he will give information. He even created a course that you could sign up for and learn step-by-step techniques from. And so he began the thing about sharing information and teaching everybody, because there are really no secrets. It's like, why should I reinvent the wheel over here when you've already done it, when we can build upon, like I stand on the shoulders of giants, to reach to the next level, and he started that. Thank you, Mr. Smith. May you rest in peace. He's been passed away now for a while. And also Ray Harryhausen, is another genius, who would have been 100 years old this month. We're recording this in June of 2020. I'm celebrating Ray Harryhausen 100 years young if he were still alive today. And, so these are the men that, without them, we would not have the CG and the special effects that you see today. People like James Cameron and, Peter Jackson and stuff, they stand on the shoulders of these giants.
Absolutely.
And that's how I got to learn a lot of this stuff. I was not able to take Dick Smith's course because, it's kind of expensive at the time. It was like $1,500 or something like that. And, every time I got $100, I'd spend it on another gallon of foam latex or whatever. But, he was kind enough that, he's the kind of person that you can actually call him. He lets his number and his address and stuff be known. And he has this course if you want to, if you can sign up for it. But when I was doing the Dead Pit and I needed to do meltdowns, I needed formulas for gelatin, all that kind of stuff. I called him up on the phone. He was kind enough to return my call, to give me the time. He would spend an hour or two on the phone with you and make, sure that you wrote everything down. And he would send you, like Xeroxes of information, of formulas and stuff. He was fantastic. And that's why we now can do a lot of the things that we can do, at least in the physical effects realm. CG, has bridged a lot of the gap, of course.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I just know that's a huge jump to go right up to director of special effects, and it would have, in a similar situation in something involving my skills, I would have been freaked.
Actually, what's weird is that there really is no director of special effects credit. Like when you go on IMDb and you try and put in, special effects credits, they have like department head and they have like, head of makeup, and stuff like that. But my job, because I was working with miniatures, I was working with physical props, I was working with all the makeup effects, meltdowns.
And you were directing a lot of other people too, right?
Yeah, and I actually directed sequences. Like there was time when we were making this film when everybody was so exhausted. We'd literally been shooting for longer than a full 24 hours. And the director himself was exhausted and sleepy. And, he was there on set, but we were recording with no sound. And so I was climbed under the table, and the actor with all the pins and needles stuck in his head with his brain hanging out, Jeremy Slate, he's supposed to be going through a series of emotions, like when you poke him in the brain and all the different brain centers, like, okay, here's the memory of when you were a little boy and you were punished, and so he's like, oh, mommy, and then here's, like, okay, now you're going to have an orgasm, we're going to poke you in this part of the brain, and now he's, and so the director was exhausted and he couldn't direct. And he said, Ed, take over, and so I directed that sequence. I'm telling the actor, like, okay, now you're getting in trouble for, breaking a window. So, like, I'm just telling him all these different things and putting him through his paces, because nobody could hear what I was saying, but his facial expressions and his like, like he's crying and stuff. Then later they dubbed all that,
Yeah, I appreciate what you were saying, because as somebody on the outside of the film industry, there are so many different names for special effects, makeup special effects, somebody, creature design, miniature design, all those little things get put in parentheses.
Bullet hits, I did it all. I did the pyro on the bullet hits. I did, I loaded the blanks, I provided the guns, just everything. I made a dummy to throw off the water tower. I built the miniatures for the, the buildings and the water tower. I was there on the day filming all that stuff. It's like a lot of times, like the director of special effects or the makeup effects guy or whatever, he's not even there on some of the days of filming some of this more, hard to do, stuff where you're under tables and dumping gallons of water down tubes and things,
Yeah. So I wouldn't have known that, because on IMDb, it just says special effects by your name. And then everybody else, I think, is special effects assistant or something like that.
Right.
And it's the movie credit that actually gives you the director of special effects.
Yeah, which is kind of a made up credit. Like they said, so Ed, what do you want your credit to be? And I go, I guess director of special effects. And so that's what they put,
Cool. Yeah. So Brett Leonard, Jeremy Slate. Now I know Jeremy Slate as a card carrying old fart from all the 60s.
He's got a great career. He had a great career.
Ton of great TV shows in the 60s, and then really kind of, for me, sort of broke out and became noticeable. Like I always recognized him when I saw him because of all the TV shows he did, but it wasn't until Born Loser that I
the first Billy Jack.
Remembered his name.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
and he's the villain, he's against Billy Jack. At the end, he told me this great story. There's a poster behind him when he dies at the very end of the movie. I think he's sitting like at a card table or something, and he's kind of leaned back in his chair, like, how you can lean back on two legs of a chair,
Right, yeah. Right.
And he's wearing these white plastic sunglasses, and they took them and they cracked them and broke them right at the bridge of the nose, and he's supposed to be getting shot in the forehead by Billy Jack, I think. And, they rigged it so that, the sunglasses would crack apart, on his head. And I don't think they show any blood or anything, but he kind of slumps down and dies. And so he told me that story about like, oh, yeah, this is how I did my death scene. Like when we're working together and I'm putting him into bald cap and giving him a fake brain hanging out and stuff like that, he would tell me all kinds of great stories. He worked on The Sons of Katie Elder with John Wayne. He was in
True Grit.
Girls with Elvis.
Oh, wow.
He was in GI Blues with Elvis. He was the villain. He was Elvis's rival in the scene, with that, I think it's Gina Lollobrigida or some, really hot Italian woman, in the GI one, with where he and Elvis are doing a bet, like who can spend the night in this girl's apartment, supposedly having sex with her. And Elvis does it, but he doesn't have sex with her. So throughout the movie, she later finds out that like they were betting about that, and so she's all pissed off at Elvis and everything. But that's one of them. And then he was in the one with the car racing where Elvis is doing a lot of, front projection, background.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff, with cars.
Very convincing.
So he was in a lot of movies, man.
Yeah, so you brought up Sons of Katie Elder. The last film we did was Octoman on this podcast.
Which was Rick Baker's first.
Yeah, written and directed by Harry Essig, who also did some of the writing for Sons of Katie Elder, which we just couldn't make those things fit in our brains.
Didn't he also do something for Creature from the Black Lagoon, Harry Essex?
He wrote it. Yes, exactly. Also, True Grit. You mentioned Sons of Katie Elder. He was in True Grit as well.
That's right. And for years, he was on the soap opera General Hospital as Dr. Asa Buchanan.
Oh my gosh! I had to watch that. There were times
he was on so many things. He's one of those guys he's that guy who's in that thing.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah. No, it definitely has a recognizable face. And it's I went through my, part of my childhood and early teens seeing him and never knowing his name until Born Losers.
Yeah, he was in tons of stuff. Streets of San Francisco, Dragnet, just all through the 60s. I mean, he goes back to the 50s, So he was in Western TV shows like Gunsmoke and Rawhide and Ty Chaparral and, all kinds of those.
So how's a guy like that act on set? I mean, this is maybe a lower budget movie than a lot of the ones he's been in.
He was great. Oh my God, I've got so many great stories and so many behind the scenes pictures of him, like with the brain with all the spikes sticking out of it, holding a can of Jolt with a big smile on his face, going hi, mugging for the camera and stuff. He was a big hippie. He was a guy that he was involved with like the free love and like he was in like a 3-way relationship. He was he was somebody that was involved with all the kind of wild sexual revolution and like the kind of stuff that those movies that Roger Corman, Peter Fonda, Bruce Dern would make, like you know what I mean? Like he was a hippie. He was a free spirit.
Wow, Dr. Swan got game.
Yeah, he was picking up on the old chicks on set and stuff. Like there were several, costume and wardrobe women and people like that. And I think he used to drive like a white Cadillac. And so he'd be tooling around with some of those old broads, So he was having a ball. Even his adult son came on set and was in the film. His adult son played like an orderly in the hospital or something.
I saw the other Slate in the cast, and I was wondering that. I'm glad you brought that up, because that happens. As it turns out, Harry Essex's son was in Octoman as well. I'm sorry, I keep going back to that.
And relatives and everybody gets put in these films.
Well, Cheryl Lawson, interestingly enough, ends up having a bigger career as a stunt woman.
Yeah, she was really athletic, and ironically, like a lot of the stuff you guys were commenting about her performance and stuff, she was one of those people that does what they call, method acting, right?
Okay.
So every scene, where she had to be upset or cry or whatever, or be out of breath, the other actor, Stephen Gregory Foster, he wasn't a method actor, and neither was Stephen, neither were probably anybody else but her. And so she is the kind of person that she would literally run around the building. She'd go out of the set and get all out of breath, get all sweaty, running, and then come back and be ready to her scene. Now she's out of breath. She had to do that, or she felt like she had to do that. So in order to cry and be all upset, she'd go into the other room and knock herself around and scream and yell and go and get all upset, and then come back and be okay, I'm ready.
I think maybe I'm being unfair if I say I wasn't impressed with her acting. I think maybe you just hit the problem. It's that she's taking this very seriously.
Yes. And
some of the other actors are not. That they're kind of embracing the craziness of it, and it makes it stand out of place. I just noticed something odd when I was looking through her IMDb credits. She's also in the film you mentioned, The Vineyard.
Yes. And so, in the area at the time, there were quite a few people that were jumping around on films,
Crazy. She's a good screamer, I'll tell you that. Boy,
yes, that was actually one of the reasons why she got hired, is because literally when they're casting these people and doing auditions, they would say, okay, this role requires a lot of screaming, please scream for us, and they were recording all this stuff on videotape and stuff, and so one of the great screams was hers.
Nice.
I guess I want to talk some about some of those effects, because we several people mentioned ones. I loved the melting, and I love the you've mentioned it several times, the brain. I was thinking of it as the acupuncture in the brain, but it reminded me a little bit of Terminal Man.
Yes, absolutely, that's funny.
Michael Crichton's early
underrated movie.
I thought that was great, and we get the first scene that Crystal mentioned where Dr. Swan stumbles in on it and throws up, but then it gets done to him. It kind of, I don't know, reminded me a little bit of I know it wasn't the same, so I won't say that. But that was cool. So you said you molded.
Well, actually, I don't know if you were thinking. I don't know if you were just about to say this or thinking this, but do you remember in the sequel to Silence of the Lambs?
Oh, that's exactly what I was thinking of.
Yes. Okay. Well,
when he feeds him his brain, right?
Yeah. Look at how our film is so many years ago, and that film was much more recent. And I mean, I'm not saying they saw our film and stole the idea or anything, but it is a little interesting how, he had a similar, brain surgery, with a guy's alive with his brain exposed to the open air. And, he's literally, cooking and eating his brain. I mean, we didn't feed him his own brain, but, he has his brain hanging out just like ours,
Yeah.
And there was another film that had a similar weird thing that I worked on. I worked on a film called Retard Dead. And in The Walking Dead, there's this, how in The Walking Dead, I don't know if you followed The Walking Dead much, but they started putting guts and dead body parts on themselves in order to sneak through the zombies. They would stink, like dead.
Right.
And so they would coat themselves with gore, Well, in the movie Retard Dead, which was made a long time ago, well before the Walking Dead series came out, we did a similar thing. The two lead characters who are cops, county sheriffs, they're wearing raincoats and they coat themselves. They're in the county morgue. They cover themselves with gore and everything so they can sneak through the zombies horde as well,
Which is a perfectly good plan, by the way.
Coincidence? Dink? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll throw an anecdote out real quick. There's a naked girl zombie, and the topless naked girl zombie in the film is actually porno actress. She used to go by the name of Shauna McCullough.
I am familiar with her work.
Yes, I mean, she's got like over 100
Of course you are.
porno films, triple X porno films. And she used to live in my area. And I know her from, Rocky Horror Picture Show. When I was younger, I used to be a projectionist at a theater that projected the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And she was a girl that came and dressed up as Janet and used to run around in her bra and panties all the time as Janet, So I knew her and her boyfriend. And, like I said, a lot of horror films, when you're doing low budget, you just tie in all your friends, your family, everybody. And so she ended up being the topless naked zombie in the film, because the other girl that was cast originally when we did the casting call, and we had, just strangers showing up, to be zombies and be characters and stuff. We had a girl that showed up that had a really good body, really, nice breasts and everything. And she volunteered to be the naked zombie. And then at the day, I molded her body, I molded her breasts and everything. I started building the appliances. And then when the time came, she bowed out. She bailed. Her boyfriend or something, told her, no, you can't do that. I don't want you, the size of a football field on the screen naked, And so we ended up having to recast that character. And Shauna McCullough, my friend, she jumped into the role for us. So that's an anecdote.
Yeah, and I had read something about that, but that's interesting. I think it seems like I've seen that in a couple other films too, where people get cold feet or didn't realize it, and which is fine.
It's ridiculous, though. We told her up front, you're going to be completely naked. I showed her pictures and drawings. I said, you're going to look rotten and hideous, and, nobody will be able to tell it's you, unless they've seen you naked or something, because, your face will be all covered up with gore and makeup and stuff. Basically, we were just looking for, a body, somebody who's willing to wear all this stuff and have their nakedness be visible,
Well, and it created a problem for you for sure.
But my friend literally stepped in at the 11th hour at the last minute. She was very comfortable with nudity and stuff, and she had no problem. And then she also was very nice to help us promote the film, because I went on a local radio TV show, and she and her boyfriend came on with me, and I did a zombie makeup on him in the studio that they filmed, and they put it on TV. And, that was great. It was an Alex Bennett show. I don't know if you know who Alex Bennett is, but he's a radio DJ, and he used to have a television show in the New York area back in the late 80s, early 90s and stuff. And so that was a lot of fun. And her boyfriend ended up being the melting zombie in the hallway, where the nun character throws a cup of holy water in his face, and he stops dead and goes, blah, blah, and melt.
So before we run out of time here, I want to give a chance for Chad or Crystal. Have been kind of quiet. So Chad, you got any questions that you haven't had answered?
Well, one of the things story-wise I always wondered about was some of the Lovecraftian aspects of it. Were those downplayed? To me, it felt downplayed. Was that because of budgetary reasons, or?
Yeah, I mean, in the script, the story of the beginning where the dead pit itself is, the room where there's a big hole in the ground where there's a dead pit, the walls and the floors and stuff were supposed to have skeletons and skulls, embedded in them. Like, in other words, this room had so many corpses and atrocities done in it that, they were just like lining the walls. They were embedded in the floor, like you would walk on skulls to get to the operating table and stuff. And, I don't know if you go back and watch the film again, or if you need to see it in the DVD version to be able to see it, but there are skulls and there are rats and stuff crawling around on the floor in the room. And then when you look inside the pit and you see the bodies down there, there's rats crawling around on them and stuff. And, the budget, would not account for as much skulls, and it would have looked like H.R. Giger world in there if I could have done it the way I wanted to, but just no money for all that, and the Lovecraftian aspect was sort of in the subtext. It was in the, in the original script, you could see the bones of that we could elaborate, if we were ever going to get a sequel or a bigger budget. I would have liked to have started, in a flashback in the Egyptian, discovering like a tomb, or finding that ring.
Hey, like the blood of the mummy there.
Yes. Yeah,
that's what was always very interesting story-wise to me about it, was those aspects of it. And I always wondered in the back of my head where it could go from here in a sequel, and just get bigger and bigger as far as the Lovecraft aspects of it, and the
Egyptian stuff too.
All that stuff. Yeah, all that stuff would have been so great.
Yeah,
I would love to do that. There was a script that the director of photography, he knew somebody who did a spec script in, the years following the film. and I never got to read it. It was something about the nun, the crazy nun,
Yeah.
Her name was something like Sister Celise or something like that. And it was some sort of backstory about her with, that would have involved the sequel and stuff. And I personally, I would love to have written the sequel, and I would have liked to have directed the sequel. I mean, I'm blind now, but, who knows, I could still possibly be involved in some way, like my wife and I
are still totally write it. I mean,
visualize it too. I mean, even though, I've only been blind for like 5 or 6 years. It's like with my wife's help, who's still fully sighted, and she's a full artist, painter, writer, poet. We met through my Hellraiser Cenobium magazine, and she was wearing a Cenobite costume when I met her on Halloween.
Wow. Love at first sight, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, we are making films, and even though I'm blind, I still have a workshop. I still have tons of molds and, all kinds of materials. And I used to teach college courses here in the San Francisco area at a college called the Academy of Art University. I taught professional level special effects makeup and, prosthetics and mask making and stuff, right up until, just before my blindness, So I'm, getting back into things, like by being on your podcast and by being on the Clive Barker podcast and stuff. And I want to do more. I want to, I'm learning. I'm trying to get back in the swing of things by trying to learn about, how to use my computer, with training, for my, with my blindness, and like training on my mobility, about, how to use a white cane and, all of that kind of stuff. So hopefully in the years to come, I will find my way back into working in the field and in the genre somehow.
Hope so.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah. I hope so. Hey, Crystal, did you have any further questions for Ed, or?
I was just really listening for the most part. I was actually going to ask kind of about the sequel thing, because I know we'd kind of briefly been asked about that, but we kind of just touched on it a little bit more. And yeah. He's pretty much answered everything.
To me, the thing of doing a sequel would be to try to take it out of the realm of, like a slasher. Like, in other words, what this film initially, what we did, what everybody says, is when you're trying to make a film and, your budget is limited, same situation with George Romero or with, Evil Dead or, with Texas Chainsaw Massacre or anything, all the information that we found out, the director found out, was that most horror films, low budget horror films, if you keep the budget low and the quality is decent, it doesn't have to be, Oscar quality or anything, because, rarely do horror films win Oscars. But the point is that if you keep the budget low and it's a decently made film, you'll make a profit. And so that's nice. The story, that most of these young filmmakers know, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Evil Dead, they all do the same formula. And Brett Leonard was no different. This was his first feature film. He decided to make it a horror film. He decided to make it a zombie film. And so, this location kind of helped the film write itself. They went there to make a different film. There was a science fiction sort of action film being shot prior to the Dead Pit. Brett Leonard had been working in other films, and so had the producer. He had worked on stuff like the Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Yeah.
Cruise area, but in the very low end of the production, like he was, what a greensman is? It's somebody who does all the green plants and digs up, ditches and things, whatever is needed to be done with green and dirt and stuff. That's a greensman. Well, Brett was acting as a greensman on Killer Clowns, which was no fun. It was cool to work on a low budget horror film and learn and meet contacts and stuff, but it was no fun, like chopping branches and hauling tree parts and things. So, he wanted to get out of that end of it and get into the writing and directing and making. And when he was younger, he made 8mm epics, like he showed me, like after Dead Pit was done and we had become friends, there was like a summer where I stayed living in the area and I worked on a Shakespeare production. The Santa Cruz area is where this film was made. Santa Cruz and Milpitas, California, which is on the other side of the hill from Santa Cruz. And so ironically, the production of the Santa Cruz Shakespeare Theater hired me to do blood work. There was a bunch of bloody plays being done right in the summer, right after Dead Pit finished, that, Titus Andronicus is one of the bloodiest plays.
Yeah.
And, Julius Caesar, with all the stabbing of Caesar on stage, is another bloody play. And then we also did, I forget what else, Taming of the Shrew or something like that. But they hired me and they gave me an office and they put me in this room and they said, Dr. Blood is in this room. And so I had a sign on my door that would say, Dr. Blood is in or Dr. Blood out.
That's awesome.
That's very cool.
So I had to manufacture and formulate special formulas of blood that would be made to wash out of the Shakespearean toga costumes and stuff like that, because, they had to perform, like so many times in a session of days of performances and get bloody every night,
That's fun.
There is still a need for that. I have been occasionally called on to make some non-staining blood, and I always have to tell them, I can't promise this is non-staining.
Yeah, I took a long time to formulate mine. I found lots of soaps, and I tried all kinds of industrial soaps, and finally came up with a formula that would wash out of the fabric of the costumes pretty good.
But you have to tell them, okay, if you want it to come out of the costume, you don't want it to go into your mouth.
Yes, it's soap. Another crazy thing that happened on that production was for Julius Caesar, it was like a high-tech, futuristic version. All the costumes of the Romans, like the centurion armor and stuff, was like almost like stormtrooper armor. It was made from like motocross, armor and vac form pieces. And I was making weapons. I was making like things that look like pulse rifles and blasters, like the British Sterling looking, stormtrooper rifles and stuff for the soldiers to carry around as sidearms.
That's all.
And that was the production that had a gigantic plexiglass wall across the back of the set. And it was all mounted on rotational pivots. And at the top was like a rain gutter system, because when they stab and kill Julius Caesar on stage, there's like a trap door and he sinks like the Wicked Witch of the North into the set, into the stage, and disappears as all the senators like converge on his body. And then the whole wall in the back begins to bleed. This clear plastic wall, just a curtain of blood just flows down.
That in a movie. I think that's sweet. I like bleeding walls. It's so hot.
And when we were testing that, of course, it leaked and spilled liquid soap blood all over the stage. And, I got a set of broken ribs by falling down, slipping on the slippery floor of the set. And that's the kind of crazy stuff that happened.
I do have a question about the Dead Pit in Internet Movie Database. There's a piece of trivia that says the pins in the brain scene was originally cut from the American release.
What? Well, the VHS release did have some trims, and there are DVDs out in Europe that are, considered like the uncut version. And I was able to get a hold of one of those DVDs, one of those. There's a company in Germany, I think, called Dragon, that put out a DVD version that was supposedly like the uncut, 35 millimeter theatrical print release. And that is true, that there is a few minutes more here and there of everything, like a little bit more TNA, a little bit more blood and gore, a little bit more brains, a little bit more, like inserting of the pins in close up and stuff like that.
I also, as I mentioned that, I thought of another one. I love the, I think it was a dentist drill to the eye.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that one. Nobody mentioned that one so far.
There's so many individual shots. I mean, some movies you can pick out, this is my favorite shot here. And this one is so overwhelming that, some of the good ones like that one kind of get lost. I'd forgotten about it till you brought it up, because you're just overwhelmed with so many. A real testament to all the work that you and your crew did in it.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. And I thought it was interesting in the Fangoria article. It did talk about how you had to start out by blocking out all the different things, and basically what you created was a project schedule, backloading to how long it would take and when you needed to start to be ready for production. Even though production
storyboarded too, I did storyboards and made lists and told them like, okay, you guys have 15 to 20 meltdowns. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to cut that down to 3. You can have like one toward the beginning, one in the middle, and a big good one at the end. That's it.
That would for $100,000. Right?
Yeah, more like 60, 70,000.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have to be winding up. I think we could obviously talk longer.
We'll have me back another time.
Actually, that has been discussed. So
I actually have worked on quite a few horror films that we could talk about.
Yeah. Well, lots of experiences as well. So appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
You have no idea how much fun this is for us, or maybe you do, but we really appreciate
it's fun
it.
for me too. Me too.
Well, Grue Believers, that's it for this episode. But every 2 weeks, we'll be focusing on a specific film released between 1980 and 1989. Next up, we're tackling one chosen by Crystal.
Yeah.
Crystal, what did you pick?
Hellraiser 2. Yeah.
Oh, right on.
Hellraiser 2, Hellbound.
Watch
right?
horror films. Keep America strong.
For real.
Absolutely. So make sure you join us for that one. There's plenty of ways to stay in touch. Please send your feedback to feedback@gruesomemagazine.com, or you can leave comments on Gruesome Magazine's HNR and DOH podcast Facebook group, our website, gruesomemagazine.com, or you can always leave a review on iTunes. Catch us again here in 3 weeks for another great horror movie of the 1980s, as only decades of horror can do it. Say goodnight, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
That's what he told us to say, right?